Well, thanks for having me, General Ham, sir. Thank you so much. Really a great honor and a privilege to be with so many friends. I think I've worked with half of you. I know most of you, and it's just been a great 35-year career that I've had, mostly because of everybody here that I've had the opportunity to serve with. You know, before I go on here, though, I want one person in the room to stand up. Paul Chamberlain, stand up. You guys, this is the 31st Director of the Army Budget, Major General Paul Chamberlain. Cool. So Paul took the baton from me back last summer and has been doing an absolutely fabulous job. We are in the thick of rollout. We've actually rolled out the FY19 budget to all of the defense subcommittees up there on the Hill. So there's just a couple more. A couple more engagements at his level, and then, as most of you know, then we go into the posture testimony season. And of course, for those of you who know what happens there in that concrete 5-sided building, we're spending a lot of our days preparing our leadership for testimony right now. So, but I just had to call out my brother there, Paul Chamberlain, fantastic officer. I'll tell you guys, we are in really good hands for the future under his leadership. So, hey, I would tell you right now, I think we are in a much better place financially than we've been in quite a while. So you might look at me and say, Horlander, what in the world are you thinking? We're in our 5th CR this year, and we've had 2 very brief laps of appropriation. So where are you coming from? I'm going to show you where I'm coming from here in a minute, but where myself as a closet strategist who did a lot of studying about the national security strategy, I would tell you what I am seeing here is a confluence of a threat-based, or a threat-informed national security strategy and a national defense strategy, and a requirements-based president's budget. And both of those are very well nested with one another. And so that's what right looks like. That's how the system is supposed to work. And so I feel really good about that. All this is possible now because of what many of us are referring to as the budget deal, or what is really the 3rd bipartisan budget act that we've seen in a row that established the top line funding levels for FY18 and FY19. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. However, I do want to pull a quote out and just have everybody kind of put this in the back of your mind as we go through this brief. This is a direct lift from the National Defense Strategy. A more lethal, resilient, and rapidly innovating joint force, combined with a robust constellation of allies and partners, will sustain American influence and ensure a favorable balance of power that safeguards the free and open international order. That's what we're all about. We are a big piece of that. We are one of the primary elements of power, as we like to say, for those of you who are familiar with DIME and PMISI and all those different frameworks that we use to talk about how we shape or how we protect our national security interests. But we are a big part of that. So this is the 3rd bipartisan budget act, as I spoke to. And this budget deal is absolutely fundamental to being able to build that force and be the Army that we're trying to build here. So I call this very much a nested strategy with a resourcing solution, and that's why I say we are in a better place than what we have been in a long time. Of course, you heard that General Reimer's here because he wants to see what a growing Army budget looks like, and so I think we're going to show you that here, sir, on the next couple of slides here. So with that, can you go to the next slide, please? So you would be quite entertained if you were in the Pentagon about 3 weeks ago. We were all trying to understand what in the world was going on with the budget deal or the Bipartisan Budget Act. And so it took us a little while to decipher all these different data points that we were seeing. But I would tell you this is quite the dynamic fiscal environment right now. You heard me say we are in our 5th continuing resolution, and of course that is scheduled to end on the 23rd of March, okay? And of course we've had 2 very short lapses of appropriation. Some people call those government shutdowns, but really it's just an elapse in an appropriation. Those were short-lived, nevertheless, not a good thing. But anyways, the president signed this fifth CRA and the Bipartisan Budget Act into law on the 9th of February. And then, we were trying to understand this 80, 85, BC, all this stuff. So I'm going to try to, we developed this pictorial, and I think if you try to follow this, it makes sense once I walk you through it. So this is FY18. A lot of activity in FY18 that is really a big change. But when you look over here, here's the president's budget. Now, one thing a lot of people don't have an appreciation for, there's a defense budget and there's a DOD budget, and they are not the same, okay? In the defense budget are pieces out of the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security, and some other agencies get some funding in the defense bill, okay? So, in this defense bill, the initial PB that went over was for $668 billion, okay? The BCA for the base was a defense cap of $549. So as the defense leadership started to work with OMB and the Hill and the administration to strike a deal to exceed the BCA caps, the deal was to exceed them by $80 billion. So where this PB went over for defense at 668, we added $80 billion to the 549, and you got 629. You add OCO, and we landed here for the defense budget in FY18 of a $700 billion defense budget, of which 650 was for the Department of Defense. Okay? So what does that mean for the United States Army? Because when we rolled out this 18 budget, I got to do that last year, we rolled this out, we added an amendment in the meantime, but we rolled out a budget of $168.5 billion. That's both base and OCO, okay? So if you're starting to look at this and you're starting to see the math, hey, we asked for 668, we got 700, or rather, in Department of Defense, we asked for 645, we got 670. You do the math, that's a $25 billion increase. So what are we going to do with that $25 billion increase? Well, so we've been going back and forth as recently as yesterday on how is this $25 billion going to be distributed across the entire Department of Defense. Right now, it looks like of that $25 billion delta, the Army's going to get about 6.5, give or take, okay? I don't know for sure, but this was as recently as yesterday in our discussions with the OSD Comptroller. So while we asked for 168.5, more than likely we're going to land somewhere around here at about 175-ish, okay? That's for FY18, and I remind you, we are 5 months into this year. So a lot of us like to start the year with an enacted budget. We haven't done that in 9 years, okay? So, but this is really at the highest level. This is where we're at with FY18. So every cloud has a silver lining, right? We've waited and we've waited for this budget deal, and now that we've got one, it looks like the Army's in strength is going. The Army's budget is going to go up between $6 and $7 billion for 18. 19 is a lot cleaner. Okay, 19 defense. We asked for 716. We got 716. For the Army, we asked for 182. We got 182. So you can see there's a lot of calculus into this, but you can see there's quite the sizable growth here. What we asked for, and then of course what we got here. That is the cleanest pictorial I could give you to try to help you wade through all of these different data points that you see out in the press and in some of the different documentation that has been pushed out there. Next slide. So for many of you, just about all of you who have worn the Army uniform or the uniform of our armed forces, we're all students of and practitioners of national security. So what I really appreciate about this situation we find ourselves in is We have today lines of effort that the Secretary of Defense provided to us on the 5th of October of last year. We have a national security strategy, and what followed very quickly after that was a national defense strategy. And we've seen those sometimes get published, not published, one-off years. So we've got a very well-defined, I believe, national security and national defense strategy, which was done concurrently with the building of the FY19 budget. But they were not separate and distinct from one another. They very much informed the defense priorities, and these two strategies very much informed the national or the defense budget that we have today. So if you look at this, it's pretty clean. Secretary Mattis told us, and I will tell you, when we sit there and do budget drills in the building, there are two words that we are focused on, and it's right there in his very first line of effort. Restore readiness and increase lethality. And those are the two watchwords. Those are the two big focuses that we're doing when we build any budget, have any budget drill, and try to prioritize requirements and those kinds of things. Secondly, big focus on strengthening alliances and partnerships. And then thirdly, there is a great effort there in the building to reform a lot of our business practices. So much of what you see in the Army is what we're doing in our acquisition community and our acquisition efforts, and that nests very neatly under the reform priorities that we have. You can see what the national security strategy calls for. Again, this calls out what we look at, or what we call our competitors. So this calls out China, calls out Russia. I think everybody's familiar with the North Korea and Iran situations that we have. And then, of course, there's the transnational threat. There's ISIS, there's jihadists, there's transnational criminal organizations. All that is called out in the national security strategy. That's why I say this is a very threat-informed strategy that was published there last December. And then it also identifies the 4 vital national security interests of the United States of America. We use that word vital because these are things that are vital to the identity of our country. And so you can read those. I think we, the Department of Defense and the Armed Forces, play an absolute critical role in all of those. Certainly the first one, certainly the second one, certainly the fourth one. And so very, very important, I say, as anybody who's going to deal in the budget world, in the comptroller world, understand the strategy. And the good news here is we've got a strategy and we've got a budget that nests with our strategy. And then you can see following right after that, about a month later, was a national defense strategy and a compete, deter, and win, peace through strength. So we want to be so strong and so formidable that nobody wants to go to fisticuffs with us, right? That's how you get peace through strength. Competition with China and Russia is central. That does not mean that we are not going to retain our counterinsurgency competencies, because we are still in a war. But I will tell you, a lot of focus on our force-on-force competition with some of the emerging big competition, big powers. And then lastly there, to sustain our influence and a regional balance of power there. On the right-hand side of the chart is the Secretary Esper's priorities. He came in, and I will tell you, we had these in a week. As you guys know, he was a serving Army officer for many, many years, came in and took the helm, and he gave us where he said his priorities are. The enduring ones is obviously taking care of the Army's people and promoting the Army's values, but readiness, modernization, and reforming our business practices, absolutely nesting with the Department of Defense and the National Security Strategy. And then the chief, everybody knows the first words out of the chief's mouth is readiness is number one. It will remain number one. And so that, building a future Army, and then, of course, taking care of the soldiers, civilians, and the families that make up the United States Army. So I like to show, here's a little tighter shot group for you and what the Army budget looks like. You can see what we actually spent here in 17. Now, I just remind everybody, 17, 18, and 19, remember when the administration came in and they said, we are going to increase defense spending. So as I spoke to many people last year at this time, we were just on the tail of getting an FY17 budget that had an amendment in it that increased the Army's top line by about $7 billion. And that's where we landed in FY17. Now here we are with about a 6% increase going into 18. Now this doesn't include that $6 to $7 billion that we think we're going to get with that $25 billion increase in 18. And then here we are in FY19. So you can do the math. Going from 17 to 18 is about a 6% increase in our bottom line, and going from 18 to 19 is about an 8% increase. So that is what we call real growth. If that was 2 and 3%, that would be growth commensurate with inflation, and that really doesn't enhance our purchasing power. Okay? So a good little sight picture here. You can see where the Army's at with base and OCO, and we're really showing an uptick in our funding levels here. So I think this is a really exciting time for us, the Army. And what we're seeing here in terms of a strategy and funding that somewhat aligns with the strategy as we would have it. All right, let me go to the next slide, please. So as we develop this budget, we develop what we call budget themes. Okay, so if we're going to build a budget, what are the themes that we want to ensure we satisfy as we build a budget for 19? So most of those I really think will resonate with you, okay? But there we are, defeating our enemies in ongoing conflict. I will tell you right now, OCO for contingency operations is fully funded, okay? With a top line of over $182 billion, we don't see any risk or any challenges with our OCO funding level. The second one there is to increase warfighter readiness. You'll see on a follow-on chart, our operations and maintenance account is sizably increased. That ensures that we are able to fund all of our readiness requirements, our current readiness requirements. The third one there is increase the Army's capacity. So in this budget, already legislated in the National Defense Authorization Act, is an increase to the Army's in strength by 4,000 individuals, 4,000 soldiers, all in the active component. That increases our capacity. So we are now authorized to have a force of 1,030,500 soldiers. That's what we are authorized to have, and this budget will cover that. The fourth and fifth ones there, so great effort here to reform and really to reform our efforts in modernization. Many of you have heard about the Army Futures Command. I think some of you have been introduced to what we are doing with our cross-functional teams, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there are 8 of those that are really looking at some of the higher priority modernization efforts and where we are taking those. But 4 and 5 are really an effort to not just invest in our priorities, but to increase the lethality in our combined arms capabilities. Number 6, right there is, this is all about conducting EDREs and CDREs. Those are emergency deployment readiness exercises. So we've got some funding in there for that. We've also funded things in our Army preposition stocks. So that enhances our readiness, our responsiveness. We can fall in on a complete set of APS, for example, APS-2 there in Europe. We are investing in our critical infrastructure. So we've got a MILCOM bill out there that is a little bit bigger than last year. We've got a good measure of funding applied against our current infrastructure, our sustainment, restoration, and modernization accounts. So definitely wanted to sustain our critical infrastructure. We are increasing global security through the allies and partners. And many of you know we've got things like Spartan Shield, Pacific Pathways, the Asia Pacific Security Initiative. We've got EDI over there in Europe, the European Deterrence Initiative. All of those increase global security through working with our allies and partners. We're reforming the Army business processes. That is not just in the acquisition community. I will tell you, we're spending a lot of time looking at not just do we spend all our money, but how well do we spend our money. Now, many of you have heard me say that before, but so we're looking at how well we spend our money through a number of different processes. And of course, the last one there, the Army is soldiers and people. So we ensure that we fully fund our Army family programs and take care of not just the soldiers, but the civilians and the families as well. I would ask everybody to get familiar with the right side of the chart there, because that is the 6 modernization priorities in priority order that are very much informed by some of our peer competitors and the capabilities that they have, and very much informed by the threat that we see and the capabilities that we need for the future. So you'll see those again and again and again if you haven't already seen them before, but those are the top 6. That doesn't mean there aren't other areas that we are investing our money in the future, but those certainly get the lion's share of the attention. Okay, next slide. So you got to have one of these pie charts with a bunch of numbers, and so this is really just top line. This is what the 19 budget looks like. This is what we've been rolling out to Congress, and again, there's your 182.1 right there. But I always like to kind of give everybody an idea. The Army's people, right? Well, over half of our budget is spent on paying for our people. When you look at the military personnel account, and then that portion of O&M, that is civ pay, that's over 50% of the Army's budget. That is to pay for our people. Then we've got, again, the O&M piece, and then here's your research, development, and acquisition. I'll tell you, you can see where the growth is going from 18 to 19. We tried to kind of parlay that right here. So for military personnel, there's a growth of about 4.5%. Again, that's associated with some of our in-strength growth that we have. O&M, about a 6% growth. And then look at RDA, about a 14% growth from 18 to 19. So you want to see, when I said there's an 8% growth across the entire Army budget, that's pretty much how it splits out here in the base program. Okay. The other good thing I will tell you, for many years, when we considered ourselves to have a suppressed top line, our RDA spend was around 18% of the Army's budget. This is 22%. Okay. So as we get an increased top line, we're able to satisfy and we're able to pursue a lot of the modernization for future readiness. And that, of course, comes in the way of an increased amount of money here in the RDA account. From 18 to 19, RDA is increased by $4 billion. That's good. That's really good. So there's your base. Now in OCO, you heard me say OCO is fully funded. OCO, again, overseas contingency operations. Really, the lion's share of that is spent there in Afghanistan, in the Horn of Africa, in Iraq, and then we are still funding EDI out of OCO. There's been a lot of efforts to try to pull that into the base. Actually, it flip-flopped back and forth here as we were building the 19 budget. It was in the base, it was out of the base. Right now, we are still funding the European Deterrence Initiative here in Europe out of this OCO fund. And these last two here are just funds that are managed by CENTCOM. We're just the banker for them. They make up about over $6 billion of this entire OCO budget that we have here. But I would tell you those two funds are pretty important in the CENTCOM AOR as we're conducting operations down there in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. So that's just to kind of give you a snapshot here of what that really looks like. So next slide. A lot of people told me, sir, you don't need to show this slide. I said, I'm going to show it anyway. So I don't know. This to me looks like the last 20 years of my professional life in bar graph format. Okay, so this slide can tell just any number of stories. And many of you have seen this before, and I won't drag it on too long. But I would tell you, when Thomas Horlander was a lieutenant colonel over there in Fort Rucker, Alabama, we had a $78 billion base budget to man, train, and equip the United States Army. Okay, 9/11 happened, a whole lot of other things happened, and then it didn't take us but 8 years to triple that top line as we went into Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, and you can see there, I like to tell people, it's not how big we grew, it's how fast we grew. So does anybody think growing that fast that we had absolute discipline between funding base requirements out of the base and OCO requirements out of OCO? I tell you, that was a challenge for us, okay? We top-lined here. General Casey was the chief. We top-lined there at about $250 billion for a few years. And then as we started to come out of Iraq, you can start to see that we started to come down, and we got into some pretty low funding areas right here. But I would tell you, just about every year here, many of us could sit here, talk about this chart and say, well, this happened because we pulled out of Iraq. This happened because we reduced the footprint in Afghanistan. This happened because of the Budget Control Act, or any number of things contributed to this sight picture. What I encourage everybody to look at is this green represents the base budget, okay? When you hear people say the budget's bigger than it's ever been, well, right now, in FY19, in this request, we have a base budget of $148 billion. So that got close up here, way back here in 09. But this is where we're at for base, okay? So you can see the story. We have leveraged OCO for base purposes many years running. It's been legislated that way, but that kind of tells that story as well. But this is quite the dynamic fiscal environment. I would tell you it's highly complex. But I like to give everybody the appreciation for how well we're doing in terms of growing a base budget to man, train, equip the United States Army, and then you've got this small portion here that's for OCO. So, next slide and last slide. This is what I need everybody's help with, okay? These are, for the United States Army for FY19, these are the key messages that we all need to collectively promulgate out there to the American public, okay? First and foremost, and this hasn't changed and hasn't changed in the last 3 years. Readiness is number one, okay? And it will remain our number one priority for as long as Secretary Esper and General Milley are at the helm. So it is number one. We are going to provide our soldiers the best training, the best equipment that we possibly can as they deploy, or as we train here. This supports the National Defense Strategy. So the National Defense Strategy, as you know, calls for a number of different capabilities there. And with this funding level, we're able to support the National Defense Strategy. I pulled this right out of OSD's slides. Great power competition is now the primary focus. So when you sit there and you start to look at our modernization and some of our priorities, you're seeing things like long-range precision fires, the next-generation combat vehicle, air and missile defense. A lot of those are very much capabilities to be able to compete with great powers. This is a requirements-based budget. So as we built this, we tried to look at our requirements and how the requirements were to satisfy some of our op plans, con plans, national security strategy, etc. So it is very much a requirements-based budget. I know I sound like a broken record. The Army, the armed forces, need their budget on the first day of the fiscal year, okay? The first day of the fiscal year. We need it predictable, we need it timely, and we need it sustainable. And right now, we have been, year after year, for 9 years, we've been under a CR on the average of about 90 days starting the year. And I would tell you, over time, I've watched that manifest itself in some less than efficient behaviors. And so getting it and getting us a full 12-month fiscal year to be able to execute our budget is really essential to us building readiness. So we are increasing capacity and capability. I talked about the end strength. I talked about the increase in O&M there. And, of course, we show some sizable increases in our modernization accounts, research, development, and acquisition. So really, this is, I like the balance here between both growing capacity and some of our capabilities. We support those 6 modernization priorities I talked about. And really, some of the things that you've been reading about and you've seen in the press, and the chief talks about it a lot, are some of these initiatives in this rapidly changing environment. So modernization reform, I think many of you are familiar with the security force assistance brigades. So we've got we've got plans, and we are starting to grow many of those. So we talked about the Army Futures Command. This is right there, smack dab in the middle of reforms, and we have these 8 CFTs, or these cross-functional teams, very RDT&E, science and technology, heavy types of efforts to try to take us to the next capability level in some of those areas. EDI, obviously, I can remember it wasn't too long ago we were spending just $500 million across the entire Department of Defense in Europe. That's up over $6 billion for the whole Department of Defense now. And then, of course, we've got this in-strength growth. And I just tell you, so business reforms is a big deal. I think the DAS will tell you we're spending a lot of time there in the building trying to reform our processes, trying to improve upon the acquisition, the RDA processes that we have there in the building that are somewhat cumbersome and not as responsive as we'd like for them to be. And so that is absolutely one of the things I'd ask everybody. Take these, put your own face on them, but help us tell this story of what we are trying to do here and what the FY18 and 19 budgets look like. So that was pretty much just the standard pitch here. Hope that gives everybody kind of a tighter sight picture or just a better understanding of what 18 and 19 really look like. I say that's good news. No, I don't like to be 5 months through the year with under a CR, but you can see the increase in the funding levels is really great. I would tell you, so I'm ready to take any questions. However, if your first name starts with Sydney, Courtney, or Megan, you guys, sorry, can't help you, man. I'm just kidding.
Thank God. We'll start here.
So we just got a few minutes here, but please let me. If you got any softball questions, go ahead.
Hi, General Ashley Roki with Shepherd Media.
Yeah, hi.
Could you sort of walk us through what's going on with the FY18 as you're looking at more money, sort of the time frame of where that money will go and the decision-making process?
So FY18, obviously, we are going to be under a CR, or at least we have a legislated CR signed into law by the President that takes us through the 23rd of March, okay? So we anticipate, right now, Congress is working through the 18 bill with the new BBA and the new top line. They're working through that. Fingers crossed, we're hopeful that at the end of this 5th CR on the 23rd that we hopefully have an enacted 18 bill, okay? Now, we will take whatever funding that the Army is provided, and we'll do what we do every year, basically, and we'll turn that into budgets for 35 different Army commands. We'll push it out to them just as quickly as we can, and then we are on the path to executing that budget. There is... Obviously, it's not ideal when you get funding, late in the year, like a funding decision or a change in the funding level late in the year. It's not ideal, but I tell you, when it's an increase, it's greatly appreciated. We are posturing ourselves to take an increase in our top line, and so we'll see how this plays out. But right now, that's sort of where we're at. Much of if we get what we would like in the increase in 18, much of it is in our modernization accounts, which is multi-year money. So we've got a little bit more time to spend it than, say, a one-year account. But I would tell you that's pretty much where we're at. I think it's a good news story that we're going to get it because we know that we've got some things that we would like to pay for. And however this plays out, we'll see. But we'll see how this plays out. Courtney McBride.
Morning, sir.
Didn't you? I thought you were embargoed.
Yeah, you tried that. No luck. So just to follow up, are you able to give us a little bit of a sense of any more of that, where that modernization money is going specifically? And then, sorry.
That's okay.
And then also on EDI, you mentioned this debate back and forth over the FY19, whether it was going to go into the base. Now that you do have a top line increase, is that going to be revisited? The Army's got, I think, $4.7 billion out of a $6.5 billion EDI in 19.
So I'll answer the last one first, just to confuse you. I have heard no dialogue, no discussion about, because there's this increase that we believe is forthcoming in the 18 budget, that there's going to be a change of how EDI is funded in 18. So I've not seen any in-depth discussions about that. So right now we are all assuming, and we're going to continue to march as if it were funded out of OCO. Okay, it could change. That's certainly possible. So in 18, with the increase, and I said most of that's in modernization, I would tell you that, again, remember what Secretary Mattis said, lethality, okay? Lethality, and so anything that we see that is going to enhance the lethality of the United States Army, and it complements what was articulated there in the National Security Strategy, that is how we see this, and that's where we think some of the funding will come in. Certainly our priorities are our priorities, but the actual details, I couldn't tell you, Courtney, to be honest with you. We know what we want, but really it's until we see something coming out of Congress, I'm not ready to say. Sir.
Yes. Hi, I'm John Doe.
Very good.
From a website. First of all, about the $6.5 billion, we're all going to keep on coming at this from different angles.
Give or take. Give or take.
Yes,
okay.
Ish. You mentioned it's heavily modernization. I mean, is there a way you can, break down the pie chart of that for us between, O&M and RDA? And second, as you're looking at, these increases both in 18 and in 19 to the RDA account, you mentioned a lot of S&T going on. How much is that? What's the weighting between, basic research, functions 1 to 3 kind of stuff, the more sort of, EMD-oriented functions, 4, 5, 6, and then, actual procurement? Because one of the great concerns is, we've had lots of great basic research and lots of sustainment on current programs, but very little in the valley of death in the middle.
So, Sydney, until we get an enacted 18 bill, I cannot tell you with any measure of certainty how it's going to break out across the different portfolios in our research, development, and acquisition, okay? I know what we say we wanted, but I cannot provide that to you until I have an enacted bill. That's the bottom line, and that's the nature of the business here. So we have looked at how we can leverage some of our RDT&E in this additive amount to kind of help us with some of the cross-functional teams and things like that. But I would tell you, until this gets through Congress, I'm not real comfortable saying how this is going to land. I know what we, the Army, would like to see, and again, the preponderance of that is in modernization. Certainly, of the 6.5, at least probably between 70 and 80% of it would be in the modernization accounts. But for me to tell you, this much in aviation, this much in artillery, this much in ground combat vehicle, can't go there.
Hi, Megan Myers, Army Times. So how much are you spending on berets? That's the question. No, so...
Sir? Can you help me with this one?
So the Army's planning to grow its end strength over the next couple of years. How much of that are you looking at for retention versus recruitment, and how much is that going to cost, providing those bonuses and that outreach?
So we have a calculus for trying to fund in-strength growth. And what I would tell you to appreciate about this, it's not just about recruiting bonuses or retention bonuses. It also has to do with an investment in our institutional Army and the training base. I don't remember the exact dollar amount right now that has to do with this 4,000 additional active component soldiers. I don't know, Paul, you know off the top of your head? Okay. So we, but I don't have a solid dollar amount for you on that. Certainly, you could see that the MilPERS request from 18 to 19 shows an uptick of between 2 and 3 billion. So that's some of that, not all of that, contributes to in-strength growth. Yes, sir. Courtney. So Courtney's been trying to get on my calendar. I've been pushing her off, so there you have it.
I'm just wondering whether you've gotten any guidance from OMB or OSD on the plans to reform OCO. Ultimately, Director Mulvaney has talked about eliminating it. He's derided it as a slush fund. So, I mean, you said there's nothing on shifting EDI to the base for 19, but is there some guidance for the out years?
So we've done a number I tell you, over the last 10 years, Courtney, we have done a number of turns on what should be the OCO rules, right? As of late, that has not been something we have been focusing on. Obviously, we have so much bandwidth, and of course, trying to work through 18 and work through 19 is been pretty much our focus on all that. So, I mean, I think the opportunity does exist in the future for OMB to come forward and readdress the OCO rules, but right now that's not been something that we've been really grappling with. So I want to make sure everybody's clear on this FY18 increase, you guys, because I'll open the front page tomorrow and Horlander says the Army's getting $6.5 billion more dollars. That is just planning right now, okay? And we've been working with OMB and OSD how we would like that to settle, but until we actually see a legislated and enacted bill here, and we anticipate that next month, I can't tell you with great certainty that that's going to be the measure of the increase for us in 18. So, with that, General, sir.
Good. Well, thank you, General Horlander.